morning. Welcome to Carmel Valley Community Chapel for our Sunday service. And today we are celebrating Dia de Muertos, Day of the Dead. I'll say a little bit more about that later on. I just want to begin by thanking Diane Salmon, not only for being our liturgist this morning, but some wonderful accordion music that she is bringing to us as well today. I also want to thank Linda Cheatham, who is doing our refreshments. And I invite us all to gather after the service next door in Fellowship Hall to enjoy some refreshments and good conversation together. At this point in the service, I invite all who are able to please stand and join responsively in the call to worship printed in the bulletin.
We clasp the hands of those that go before us,
and the hands of those who come after us. We enter the little circle of each other's arms, and the larger circle of lovers whose hands are joined in a dance.
And the larger circle of all creatures,
passing in and out of life, who move also in a dance, to a music so subtle and vast that no ear hears it, except in fragments. Let us join together in singing our opening hymn, which is number 100 in the hymnal, God whose love is reigning o'er us. I invite you at this point in the service to take a few minutes of silent meditation, to take this time to center your hearts, your minds, your bodies, and your spirits into this here and now that we are sharing together. After a few moments have gone by for meditation, I'll bring us back into the flow of our liturgy with a little musical meditation. Let us join together now in silent meditation and prayer. Our reading for this morning is a little bit unconventional, but I hope it is not uncalled for, given today's theme. Our reading today is a Zuni chant, and it comes from one of the indigenous peoples who lived in what is now called New Mexico, the Zuni. Now, the Zuni call their homeland Halona Iriwana, which means middle place. And most live in the pueblo of Zuni, which is about 34 miles south of Gallup, New Mexico. But their tribal name is not originally Zuni. It was Ashiwi, sometimes just Shiwi, which means the flesh. The name Zuni was a Spanish adaptation of a word of unknown meaning. By the way, folks, all of this material I'm giving you, I found online, and I'm always really nervous about sharing online information. I tried to find sources that I thought were reputable, but if any of you know more about this than I do and hear something incorrect, please let me know. Now, the Zuni speak their own language, and they continue to practice their traditional shamanistic religion with its ceremonies, dances, and mythology. And their cultural and religious traditions are rooted in large part in the people's deep and close ties to nature, to the mountains, the rivers, the forests, the deserts, their ancient homeland. Traditional Zuni life is oriented around a matrilineal clan system and a complex ceremonial system based on a belief in the ancestors or the ancient ones. Now, I want to let you know that I made one change to the wording of this chant. Rather than use the exclusively masculine personal pronoun, I decided to switch and to substitute, moving and including both male and female personal pronouns to make it more inclusive. This chant is about having a connection with the divine through the breath of the Divine One and our own breath and breathing as well. And I can't help but be reminded of how in the Hebrew language, in the First Testament in our Bible, the word spirit also means breath. It also means wind. And in Hebrew, all those meanings get enfolded into one word, ruach. So as you listen to this chant, perhaps you might give some attention to your own breathing. And perhaps you might consider how our spirit breath merges with the spirit breath of the eternal.
Beseeching the breath of the Divine One, her life-giving breath, his breath of old age, her breath of waters, his breath of seeds, her breath of riches, his breath of fecundity, her breath of power, his breath of good fortune, asking for her breath, and into my warm body, drawing his breath, I add to your breath, that happily you may always live.
Let us join together in singing The Gift of Love, number 408 in the hymnal. Dia de Muertos, or Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead. It can conjure up some rather unpleasant and macabre images, especially when you see all those skeletons walking around. But it is not depressing or sorrowful or scary celebration. It is a celebration of life that joyfully includes those whom we have loved that are no longer with us. It is a time of reconnecting with those that we have lost, and in some way, through remembrance and celebration, continuing our relationship with them, even though they are not physically with us. This is also a season for other festivals that connect to the Day of the Dead. November 1st is the Feast of All Saints. November 2nd is the Feast of All Souls. We don't want to exclude anyone. And Dia de los Muertos is celebrated on both November 1st and 2nd, and often on October 31st as well, and in some places a few other days too around this time. All these traditions are about remembrance. And all these traditions are celebratory, though I have to say the traditions that I grew up with as a boy, like All Saints' Day, was a rather muted celebration. One that's actually quite appropriate for people that Garrison Keillor called the frozen chosen. But all of these days of remembrance are celebratory. And this day, I have someone new departed to add to the list of people to remember. Earlier this week, I attended the funeral mass of Kathy Anderson, who's the mother of a friend of the chapel, Laura Anderson, now married and goes by the name Laura Schwingel. And it was a rare experience for me to be in the audience at a memorial service. And I was really moved at how beautiful and how appropriate for Kathy that service was, and how much it meant and how important it was on so many levels, not just mentally and emotionally, but spiritually as well, for the family and the people in the community that lost someone precious and loved and were celebrating her life together. How very rich and meaningful that was, far beyond whatever words might have been spoken. So I am thinking about Kathy this year around this time. And I want to share with you a poem by May Sarton. And this poem is titled, All Souls. I'm going to read it, and then I'd like to talk about it a little bit, because for me it's taken several readings to kind of peel into some of the deeper layers of this piece. I will just give a little bit of context by letting you all know that May Sarton, for most of her life, lived in the northeast of the country, where around this time of year it's rather cold. And that's not to be compared with what we consider cold. All Souls by May Sarton. Did someone say that there would be an end? An end, oh, an end to love and mourning. Such voices speak when sleep and waking blend. The cold, bleak voices of the early morning, when all the birds are dumb in dark November. Remember and forget, forget, remember. After the false night, warm, true voices wake. Voice of the dead that touches the cold living. Through the pale sunlight once more gravely speak. Tell me again, while the last leaves are falling. Dear child, what has once been so interwoven cannot be raveled, nor the gift ungiven. Now the dead move through all of us, still glowing. Mother and child, lover and lover, mated, are wound and bound together and enflowing. What has been plaited cannot be unplaited. Only the strands grow richer with each loss. And memory makes kings and queens of us. Dark into light, light into darkness, spin. When all the birds have flown to some real haven, we who find shelter in the warmth within, listen and feel new cherished, new forgiven, as the lost human voices speak through us and blend our complex love, our mourning without end. I'm struck with how many things, different things, Sarton weaves together. And she makes a very clear connection between love and mourning, which I think is itself very rich and very deep, and as she says at the end, very complex. I know that at times when we are feeling most deeply bereft, a mourning may seem like just something painful to endure. But part of the message here, I think, is that mourning is deeply connected to our loving. And we mourn most deeply what we or who we have loved most deeply, and who and what has most deeply loved us. And so throughout this poem called All Souls, there is this deep, rich, complex connection between love and mourning. And with these bringing together of different things, we enter into what is referred to as the liminal, the time just between the darkness of night and the sunrise of day. You know, that time where it's not dark, the sun's not up yet, but there's this glow. That glow of that particular time in between darkness and day is one example of liminal time, where the boundary between darkness and light seems to be fluid and merging, and it's both and neither. And there's some liminal images here in this poem. She talks about this time when sleep and waking blend. Liminal time. She talks about the birds, but the birds are dumb because it's November. It's cold. They're not singing anymore. They're not speaking. The smart ones have flown south. And so the bird song, which Sarton loves, is not present. And then she says, remember, forget, forget, remember. And I wonder if that might not be an intuition that there's a liminal aspect to remembrance and forgetting. That this remembrance and forgetfulness has a permeable membrane. And it's interesting, the second stanza of this poem begins, after the false night, warm, true voices wake. And then she says, voice of the dead. So the warm, true voices are the voices of the dead. And the next thing she says in the sentence touches the cold living. Again, there's some liminality between warmth and cold, and this sense that the dead have warm, true voices, and they speak to the living who are cold. I wonder about that. And at the end of this stanza, we hear those voices speak. And they say, dear child, what has been so interwoven cannot be raveled, nor the gift ungiven. And then the boundaries between the living and the dead seem to get crossed, transgressed. And the third stanza begins with the dead that move through all of us. And when that happens, they are still glowing. It's all wound together, and I love this word she uses, enflowing, enflowing, enflowing. And how in this act of transgression of boundaries between the living and the dead, this liminal moment, this liminal space, the strands that have been woven actually continue to grow, to get richer. It's kind of a connection with that word fecundity in the Zuni chant, which means this fertility and fruitfulness. And it specifically, kind of implies what is coming after us, the next generation, or the next harvest. And then the last stanza continues, bringing together dichotomies, dark into light, finding shelter within the warmth within, and that feeling of listening, that feeling of ourselves being cherished and forgiven, perhaps by some of these people we are missing and wishing we would have taken one more walk with them, or not fell through on that promise we made once upon a time. And then it concludes with all these human voices speaking through us and blending this love and this mourning, which are both so important to times of remembrance and times of celebration. Let me read this poem one more time. All Souls by May Sarton. Did someone say that there would be an end? An end, oh, an end to love and mourning. Such voices speak when sleep and waking blend, the cold, bleak voices of the early morning. when all the birds are dumb in dark November. Remember and forget, forget, remember. After the false night, warm, true voices wake. Voice of the dead that touches the cold living. Through the pale sunlight, once more gravely speak. Tell me again, when the last leaves are falling. Dear child, what has been once so interwoven cannot be raveled, nor the gift ungiven. Now the dead move through all of us, still glowing, mother and child, lover and lover mated, are wound and bound together and enflowing. What has been plaited cannot be unplaited. Only the strands grow richer with each loss, and memory makes kings and queens of us. Dark into light, light into darkness, spin. When all the birds have flown to some real haven, we who find shelter in the warmth within, listen and feel new cherished, new forgiven, as the lost human voices speak through us and blend our complex love, our mourning without end. It's a reminder that these times, these celebrations, festivals of remembrance are about love. And they are about listening and reconnecting with a part of the dead that is still within us and speaking through us. And it is cause for celebration. And I want to share one more reading this morning, because this moves us into a more celebratory direction. This is an excerpt from the novel Beloved by Toni Morrison. And this novel is set during the time of slavery in America. And it explores unflinchingly and honestly the effects of trauma upon a community. One of the leaders of this community in the novel was a woman named Baby Suggs. So let's remember, when the reading talks about Baby Suggs, she's a full-grown woman. She's not a baby. But this is a story of a time in the novel when she is leading her community. Morrison writes, uncalled, unrobed, unanointed, Baby Suggs, holy, followed by every black man, woman, and child who could make it through, took her great heart to the clearing. After situating herself on a huge flat-sided rock, Baby Suggs bowed her head and prayed silently. The company watched her from the trees. They knew she was ready when she put her stick down. And then she shouted, "Let the children come." And they ran from the trees toward her. "Let your mothers hear you laugh," she told them, and the woods rang. The adults looked on and could not help smiling. Then, "Let the grown men come," she shouted. They stepped out one by one from among the ringing trees. Let your wives and your children see you dance, she told them. And the ground life shuddered under their feet. Finally, she called the women to her. Cry, she told them, for the living and the dead. Just cry. And without covering their eyes, the women let loose. It started that way. Laughing children, dancing men, crying women, and then it got mixed up. Women stopped crying and danced. Men sat down and cried. Children danced, women laughed. Children cried until exhausted and riven, all and each lay about the clearing, damp and gasping for breath. In the silence that followed, baby Suggs, holy, offered up to them her great big heart. She did not tell them to clean up their lives or to go and sin no more. She did not tell them they were the blessed of the earth, its inheriting meek or its glory bound pure. She told them that the only grace they could have was the grace they could imagine. That if they could not see it, they would not have it. Here, she said, in this here place, we flesh. Flesh that weeps, laughs, flesh that dances on bare feet in grass. Love it hard. Yonder they do not love your flesh. They despise it. It is flesh I'm talking about here. Flesh that needs to be loved. Feet that need to rest and dance. Backs that need support. Shoulders that need arms, strong arms, I'm telling you. And oh, my people, out yonder, hear me. They do not love your neck unnoosed and straight. So love your neck. Put a hand on it, stroke it, and hold it up. The beat and beating heart, love that too. Love your heart. Saying no more, she stood up then and danced with her twisted hip the rest of what her heart had to say, while the others opened their mouths and gave her the music. Long notes held until the four-part harmony was perfect enough for their deeply loved flesh. At this point in the service, I invite our Board of Trustees President, Dan Riley, to come forward and give us a stewardship moment. Dan?
Good morning. I have a few notes here that I'd like to refer to. I want to talk about why I am a church member and why do I support this church. But first, I'd like to give a little brief history. I was baptized about 85 years ago in the Congregational Church in Berkeley, where I was born. Both of my grandfathers were ministers. My mother's father was a Moravian minister. If you haven't heard of Moravian Church, it was formed 100 years before Martin Luther in Austria in protest to the Catholic values. My father's father was a congregational minister, mostly here in California. So I was preordained to attend church, particularly as a child. I've attended church most of my life, starting out by a Presbyterian church where I went to Sunday school. Later, a couple of congregational churches. Beyond that, 3 different Missouri Synod Lutheran churches. And now here. In preparing this talk, I thought back to the years I have of experiencing church and religion. And I focused on a time when I was a teenager milking my family herd about 70 years ago. And we always had the radio on in the barn, thinking that it soothed the cows a little bit. I think more likely it soothed the milker. During the most of the time, it was stationed on turned to KTRB in Modesto, which was mostly hillbilly music. But on Sunday morning, it was special. We turned it to KMJ in Fresno to listen to an hour of the Gospelaires, who did 4-part harmony music. And I especially enjoyed that, and I think it fixed my love somewhat for the music of church. So, really, I come to this church largely for the music, but there are other reasons. I came to this church because 30 years ago or so, I met George Wilson. I appreciated his philosophy. I wasn't going to the church at that time. I appreciate his philosophy, his focus on sustainability, his willingness to say he had doubts. He had walked with Martin Luther King in Selma, Alabama. I think my grandfather would have walked with Martin Luther King had he been here then. I come to this church because I enjoy hearing different interpretations of Scripture and other things that relate to the world we live in. I come to this church for the serious conversations that we have on the issues of the day with fellow parishioners. And I come to this church for congenial friendship. And finally, for the music. So it's important to me that this church and all of you are important to me in my life. So please reflect on your history, your feelings about the church, the religion, and go to the website and make a pledge of yourselves, your wealth, and your ability to serve, or you can mail in your pledge cards. And by the way, please at the same time fill out your ballots or vote on November the 8th. So, thank you.
I'm multitasking today. Please give as you are able. Please join me in blessing the gifts together. Generous and loving God, provider of life and of all that sustains it, we thank you not only for your gifts to us, but for the gift of sharing what we have with others. Use us and our offerings to build a more just and joyful, more compassionate and whole. Amen.
Joys and your concerns
for Diane Salmon, who sensed somehow that it was time to lift the heaviness of spirit that we have been dealing with for so many weeks and so many months and years, and light the candles on the altar. It has been weeks, and it's really wonderful to see them. Thank you, Diane.
Thank you, Diane.
Well, between my son and I, we were keeping the medical industry job security. My son was taken to CHOMP yesterday for the next several days due to some health issues that he's been going through. And so we're keeping all their job securities going. And the second part of this, since I've been to this church for so many years, a lot of different music, and there have been times I've had bad days, and I come in, the music's uplifted me, so that's really helped. And I wish that would continue. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy. And we'll certainly continue to keep Matt in our prayers. Lamont.
Excuse me. I wanted to give thanks for the poem by Seton, is it? Sarton. And when I was listening to the use of the word mourn and morning, at mourn as in beginning of day and mourn as in mourning, and I listened to it the second time and interchanged those words every time they occurred, and it really deepened it incredibly. Morning and morning and morning and morning and morning. Okay. So I want to give thanks for the sacred wordplay of divine puns. Thanks be to God.
Thanks be to God. Anne.
I just want to thank you, Rick, for your very educational sermon. I've been in those places, and I can really relate to what's going on, I think. But you really lift my soul with those. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne. Barbara?
Thank you. I feel peace like a warm shawl. It's been a lovely morning.
Thank you. So glad you are here. Wayne.
We come from San Francisco, and we got to know Mrs. Pelosi, and we are very thankful for the first responders and the medical staff that got help for her husband.
You hear anything last-minute news about how he's doing?
Well, the latest I've heard is that he's survived and he's doing well, and they think that he'll recover.
We'll certainly keep Mr. Pelosi in our thoughts and prayers. And if I may tack on to that, let's keep in our thoughts and prayers our fellow citizens, so many of whom are hurting, afraid, angry, being fed misinformation, being manipulated by people who want power. And let us pray for an end to this kind of fear that leads to violence, and for some real communication between people who have different perspectives in our country especially. God, hear our prayer. If there's nothing else that folks wish to share, let's join together for a few moments of silent prayer. After a little bit of time has gone by, I'll invite you to join together in this new version of the prayer of Jesus that's printed in the bulletin. Let us join together now in silent prayer.